think this is round about my fourth or fifth podcast for Sack and Taff. So welcome to my podcast. My name is Rosalind Roberts, and if you haven't seen any of my podcasts before, it'd be good if you could reflect, so you sort of know a little bit more about my background. So the podcast is mainly about a book that I wrote years ago called The Sacrifice of a Lifetime, but I've called it Sack and Taff because sometimes I may involve a little bit of my new book, Taffy How. It's not really a new book because I've been promoting it for a while, but it's the book that I'm promoting now. But I'm actually going to go back and re-edit my very first book, A Sacrifice of a Lifetime, and bring that book out. And it's quite controversial, so I didn't want to just sort of promote A Sacrifice of a Lifetime like I do Taffy How. I needed to have some sort of backing so I could share more about the contents of the book in a way that you'll be able to understand, because what I found was a few people didn't understand the book. They picked up the wrong pointers and used it in a negative way, and it's just not encouraging. And that's not why I wrote the book. There's a reason why I wrote it. A majority of the people understand it, and a majority of the people took something positive from it, but there's a few that didn't, and I thought, you know what, I want to bring the book out again. I'm going to have to talk about the book. It's very personal, but I'd like to have a podcast as well to go with it so I can just discuss certain issues and so on and so forth. So I haven't got into it yet. It's like I'm procrastinating, isn't it? But I just wanted you to know a little bit about my background as regards to me as an author, and why I decided to self-publish with A Sacrifice of a Lifetime. I decided to self-publish because I knew the book was quite controversial, and I think I must have spoken about it before. I knew the book was controversial, and I knew not any publisher was going to take the book on. I knew that. But then after going to a few publishers, and one, he actually decided to publish it and then decided not to. That's when I came to the point, I said, no problem. I've decided to self-publish the book myself, and he tried to make me feel as though I wouldn't be able to do it. I've shared in the other ones what he actually said. He basically said, have you got £10,000? And I said no, and then he spent about 10 minutes telling me why I wouldn't be able to self-publish. Me was really, really heated up, kept calm, but I was heated up, and I basically said, explain, no, I would be able to self-publish it, and I told him how, and it was how a student puts together a thesis. It was like that. I was going to put it together like that, and which I did. Okay, so I'll basically rewind a little bit. So, okay. So basically, at the time, I had small children. Right? At the time, I had small children. And I wanted to be a stay-at-home mum. It was important for me to be at home, but at the same time, earn a living. So I sort of wanted to work around my children. So what I did was I did a few sales jobs and things like that. Maybe I did one in the evening, and it just felt as though all the money I was getting, I was paying the childminder, and it just didn't really make sense. It would only be maybe I think it was about 3 evenings in the week. It just didn't really make sense. So I came across another job whereby you could work in the hours you wanted to work, and what it allowed me to do was to take my child with me. So basically, it was a matter of distributing a catalogue, leaving it with leaving it with people for like 2 days. It could be 3 days. With me, it was 2 days, and then going back, and hopefully I'll have orders. So what's happened now is the coordinator that was dealing with it, I remember the very first time she came to my home and told me what the job entailed, and she laughed at the area she was going to give me, part of the area she was going to give me. And I said, why are you laughing? And she said to me, because the last distributor was very unreliable and didn't do well in that area. She was very unreliable, and she gave me that part to do, and then it was another section as well, right? Because it's sort of like you go round sort of every 2 or 3 weeks in this particular area, something like that anyway. So what happened was, that particular area that she laughed at, turns out it happened to be my best area, because with me, I'm very diligent, I'm very reliable, and I like talking to people. So when they saw that I was reliable, I got a lot of response, a lot of custom, and a lot of orders. And that's when I began to realize that, you know what, I sort of have a knack when it comes to communicating with people. I seem to get on well with different people from different backgrounds. So when it came to my work, I thought, you know what I'm going to do? Well, I decided to self-publish because I've shared about why when I used to go to a writer's circle once a month, and it just felt like I was surrounded by people who wanted to be writers. It's not like, I didn't get the feeling that they were actually going to be writers. So what happened was, they used to have one guest speaker come in per month, and this particular guest speaker happened to be a historian, which is one of my favourite subjects, history. And he shared about how he self-published his book for £1,000. Didn't think anything of it. I was listening, but it's only when I came to looking for publishers, that's when I began to realise it is quite difficult if you're a first-time writer. My book is quite controversial. Not everybody's going to take on the book. You know what? I've decided to I'm going to self-publish. So the way that I did it was, I needed funding. So the way I did it, I got together the first chapter of the book, A Sacrifice of a Lifetime. I put it together nicely in a folder. And to all of my customers, I told them what I was doing and asked them if they'd like to read the first chapter. And if they liked what they read, excuse me, if they could sponsor me in advance for £5, that would help. And I was finding around about 7 to 8 out of 10 of my customers were wanting to sponsor me. And then I thought, you know what, because a lot of my customers want to sponsor me, I'm going to go down to their neighbours as well on the roads. So I was going to the neighbours that didn't really even know me, and they were sponsoring me as well. So basically I raised up about roughly £1,250, something like that, in a span of, how many months did I say? Was it in 6 months? In about 6 months. So that enabled me to start the process of putting my book together. And I only had enough funding to put the first part of the book together, because at first, to be honest, I was photocopying the first, second and third part of the book. I put it into 3 parts so I could manage it. I could manage the finance behind it. And in the beginning, the first part, I was photocopying, and I was spending a lot of time in the photocopying and so on and so forth. And I've shared how, you know, they could see how much profit they were making, and they bought this gigantic machine, and they said, now you'll be able to do even more photocopy even faster. And I thought, whoa, these people are really looking after me, not realising they were heaping a lot of hard work on me, because it was hard enough work photocopying and cutting the paper up into so it was A5, and then clipping them together and so on. So I just thought, nah. And then eventually, what it is, within that week, I found a local printers not far from where I live, and they said that they could print up the first part of the book for a reasonable cost. So I thought, you know what, at least I'm going to have the first part printed up. And then what I'll do is I'll do the second and third part in photocopy until I can afford to put the whole book together. And I remember going back to the photocopier place and telling them this, and because at first the guy was saying, no, it's not because of you, it's not because of you. And then when I told him that I found printers to print up the first book, so I won't have to come in here as often, his face just went bright red. When I went in there again, the machine had gone. Exactly. Yeah, but it took that. Sometimes, you need a bit of a push. It took that to make me realise I can do better than what I'm doing. So that was the first part of the book, and then eventually, and then with the second and third part, it took people time to decide if they wanted the second and third part. A couple of weeks, 3 weeks, a month. I'd ring them up and say, did you enjoy the first part? Would you like so on and so forth? That's how I did it. And then after some time, I remember being in another printer's, not in the printers, in a shop where I was doing photocopy, and there was a gentleman in front of me. It was taking a little while. I had a young child with me, maybe two, and one of them, or both of them, were a bit restless. And he said, he was like trying to, speed up a bit and not to take too much longer. And then he asked me what was it I needed to photocopy, and I told him. And then he explained to me that he knows of printers that print up minimum one book to as many books as you want. And hey presto, that's how I managed to put the whole book together and get it printed up. That's how I managed to do A Sacrifice of a Lifetime. I didn't bring my books with me this morning because I was in two minds whether I was going to do a podcast this morning, and I should have organised myself a lot better. But I have shown you the first publication in another podcast, but I need to carry them with me. I need to carry, and I've got a new version as well, which I'll eventually show you, and you'll see it really does need to be updated, and a lot of work needs to be done on the editing and so on and so forth. Yeah, so and that was the start of that, and I sold over about 12,500 copies over a span of time. And like I've shared before, the reaction, I remember one time where I was dropping off a book to a customer, right? And I had rung her, to let her know I'm coming, or I think it was for her husband or for her, I can't remember. And I remember getting a taxi. Oh, yeah, taxi. I remember getting a taxi there. And I remember her taking the book, or I can't remember what she said, something like, I don't believe you've written this book, and I wonder this is going on in your life. She's getting personal, and she never knew anything about my personal life. And then, it felt as though she wanted me to feel ashamed of what I'd written. So she hadn't taken on board the fact that there was a reason behind why I'd written it. And there was another customer as well that read the book and sent me it back saying, I don't read things like that. And I'm sort of thinking, you got to read the end of the book to find out what happens. You got to read the end of the book to see how it turns around. You've got to read it, Yeah. And then even like I said before, even a close friend of mine, she read the book, and it took her a few years for her to come and call me a derogative name. And then I remember a few weeks later she apologised. But then what's happened is it's only recently, and I mean, where are we now? March. So about 5 months ago, and she called me this name 8-9 years ago. 5 months ago, she's done the same thing in relation to the book. So there's some substance behind the book. People are picking up on the negative side of the book. They're not picking up on why I've written the book, the positive side. They haven't picked up on the fact that it took a lot of strength and courage for me to share about this. It's personal, and I'm a very personal person. But if I feel my story is going to be productive and it's going to be of help to anybody, I'd rather share it. So they're picking up on the wrong thing, They're picking up on the wrong thing. So that's why, I've chosen. And I'm glad that it's taken me time to actually get into the book, to be honest, because, when I start talking about it, I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about it. And I'm not going to talk about it out of shame. I'm not. And to be honest, me doing the podcast is really making me see how passionate I am about sharing. There was a reason why I chose to write the book, and I'm sticking to that reason because I wrote the book over 20 years ago. Oh yeah. And I think at that age, I wouldn't have been mature enough to talk about it then like I can now, because a lot of people would have pointed the finger and it would have made me feel small. And it would have. And I don't think I was mature enough to talk about it. I was mature enough to write it, but I wasn't mature enough to promote it and to talk about it, because you get some people are just so self-righteous. So self-righteous. They're so self-righteous. You know, so there you go. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I'll leave it like that for now. I want to share more. I'm going to share more in another podcast as regards to me meeting there was a negative side from one or two customers, but I want to share about a positive side from another customer I met, which made a huge difference to my life. I hope you've enjoyed listening to the podcast. It's called Sack and Taff, and you can watch it on my YouTube, Welcome Muslim Roberts. You know, you should see it there, Sack and Taff. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, it's Roslyn1325. I'm also on Facebook as Roslyn Roberts, which is my name. And what else do I do? Yeah, you know, at the moment, that's what I'm doing. So if you can, you know, put a few likes up, share some comments as well if you wish. And as I progress and talk more about a sacrifice of a lifetime, feel free to share some comments. Feel free, be open and honest, and feel free to share. You take care. Speak to you soon. Bye bye.